It's a little tricky. I feel like if you intern in a studio, there's a lot you can pick up.
Yeah.
If you intern for a composer, it's very often you do metadata or crappy tasks, because if the only way you can pick something up is if I actually narrate while I work.
Hey Lars, thank you so much for coming on the channel. I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us today and nerd out about audio and music stuff.
Thank you for having me.
So I just wanted to, before we get started, I just want to introduce you to the audience a little bit. So you are a 2-time Emmy-winning composer and music producer, and you've scored over 400 films and commercials. Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool. I was wondering, could you kind of introduce yourself in your own words and tell us what you're doing, what you're focusing on, what your work's like?
I think because I work in a number of different fields, all to do with sound and audio, the most succinct way is saying it's storytelling with sound and music. And that goes from music management's labels sending me their artists or artists approaching me, so I write with them so it doesn't sound like everybody else, so it actually specifically sounds like them. So kind of like on story to scoring films or commercials, and a little like the mixing and audio post has become a fairly big part of what I do as well. And that's partially because people had the same experiences that I have, where people made mixing or production choices that were not story driven and that didn't help. And so this is kind of like the whole thing is a part of it now. So kind of basically anything that helps the story, the thing you want to tell, with sound and music.
Yeah, so it sounds like you have a really wide range of experience, because you've done the film stuff, and you've done the composing stuff, and then you've worked with musicians a lot too, right?
Yeah, and it's also pretty much every genre as well. And I have this, it's almost like subconsciously learning or exploring is my focus more than anything else. The other day, somebody asked me about, like, talk about your career. And it always doesn't really feel like a career. It almost feels like subconsciously I make the choice, oh, I haven't done this. Let's try this. Let's explore this area. And so what the good thing about this is that you kind of amass a lot of skills in different fields. So 2022 was high energy, high speed rap and hip hop.
Cool.
It a lot. And then I've written a classical score for a flying theater that's like a ride attraction that will open in Mexico City next year.
Oh, awesome.
And it's huge, and it's an orchestral big Hollywood score, but it has some Mexican elements. They didn't want it to sound like cliche Mexico, so you go to Mexico and I figure out how can I write music that sounds Hollywood and big and supports this, but has a heart somewhere, a Mexican heart. And then I'm always looking for kind of the new sound, the new thing to try and to do.
For that tourist attraction, what kind of things did you have to do differently because it was a tourist attraction? A ride, sorry. Yeah.
So the ride so you get strapped in and there's a lot of movement and things going on. So you're kind of, when you score it and you look at something this size, and the panning of the camera changes a bit, it's not a big deal while you work, but you need to feel and imagine that the audience is now feeling like they're hanging over a cliff or they're flying straight up. So you kind of need to overemphasize those movements. So when they are in the space, that it sounds accurate. The other thing with this is that this is a continuous forward flight. And one of the things that we took a couple of rounds with the client was, you have this idea that you're flying. And so my first couple of rounds in the opening, they were very open, very slow, and we're floating, and then it picks up momentum. And it took a while till I figured out that their wish really was to, even though it's open and floaty, to be driven through the experience. So basically there is a fairly constant pulse pushing us through the thing. So the movement makes a big difference. And nobody's speaking, so you need to have like this, it's big orchestration, lots of stuff going on everywhere. And,
attention grabbing stuff.
Yeah, yes, to an extent, but only to an extent, because part of the appeal of these flying theaters is that when they shoot those, the helicopter flies like a bird would fly, theoretically. So people who get motion sick should not get motion sick in this, and they should enjoy it.
Should.
And so you don't want to do too many kind of jerky things because it's one continuous flight. But I have lots of Mexican flutes and small guitars and things popping up here and there, and yeah.
That's awesome. Is that something that you mix in Atmos? Is that an Atmos thing?
No, at the moment it's stereo and stems, and so the people, when they were building the venue, we were talking about what sound system would make the most sense, but the motion is just forward, and they're fairly wide next to each other in front of the screen, and everything is moving. So there's really not much of an up and down sensation, and there's really no need to have any sound behind you.
Okay.
So, and it will, because this is loud, it kind of like, even though the room will be treated, it kind of moves around you organically. So the idea at the moment is to have the music just full on stereo here, and then have another set of stereo below, basically to do the movement, the forward movement.
Okay.
And this is part I worked on this so long. I needed a fresh pair of ears, and Irko did the mix. You know Irko?
I don't know.
And he did Kanye's Donda and a lot of other things. And we've been working together for a while. And he has an Atmos room, but he basically also said, if we only have this movement, why make it so complicated? And the other thing is, because of the movement of the audience, you can have phasing issues fairly quickly. And so having the sound, like the music clear, stereo in front of you, and the sound from below seems like a less speakers and probably better experience.
Yeah. Why overcomplicate it, huh?
Yeah.
So you mentioned flutes and stuff, and that reminds me of one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, how often are you working with like digital instruments versus working with real musicians in the studio? And does that vary based on project? And
it does vary a lot based on project. For most film things, it's almost a given that there's no real players anymore. And in a way, the younger the filmmaker, and by young I mean basically 50 and younger, means you do most of the things in the box. And I do get briefs where it specifically says we are looking for somebody who can do a big orchestral sound but doesn't need an orchestra for it. And part of that is because of the Total Recall. Part of it is because the samples and the scripting and everything got so much better. And I can, to an extent, I always want to put musicians to work. But if I do a pop album, or if I work with an artist and we know it's this contained thing, I know I'm not going to get a million notes, and you go and you hire real players, it's a great idea. And the whatever, your brass section, your strings, they will stay in, or your drummer, and you move on. With a score project, the problem is that there's usually notes till the very end, and it gets more and more tricky with more and more real players. But so it's very often in the box. Okay.
And the final version is in the box too.
The final version very often is in the box too. It depends a little. Sometimes you have you add a string quartet, or I did a big choir production where the client wanted to have 200 voices, where you had to do that with real performers. But clients are a little it gets a little reasonable when when we finished the recording and they basically asked for a different, the choir to sing a different line at some point.
Yeah.
And you're explaining that, I don't have a choir in my pocket. What do you want me to do?
Yeah.
Do you want me to assemble them again, book the studio again? And so the Total Recall thing is a bit of an issue, and it's also a while back, Antelope Audio gave me their plugins, which are all it's all real time, and so I played around with them, and then I'm I cannot integrate this in my workflow because like I render so many versions of something. I cannot sit here for a score for 90 minutes to watch something render in real time.
Yeah.
And so the workflow is kind of king. And that's why there's lots of stuff in the box and more real instruments on the pop side.
Okay. Are you, I see you have a setup. Are you at home right now? Is this your home?
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you tend to work more there or in bigger studios, or what's the location like usually? Also, I think I have the same acoustic treatment as you.
Yeah. It's
The quarter
it's 99% at home, and I do mix on headphones, which makes a big difference. There's a couple of things I can't do here, and basically all writing, the pre-production, everything I can do here, and then you can do final mix or final approval somewhere else. And I wouldn't record a string quartet here or a drummer, but I can record vocals very well. And it's the only problem really is like I was on Produce Like a Pro, and Warren interviewed me, and he came here. And the reason he came here was that he likes how what I produce sound, and it's kind of like astonishing that I do this in this room. So kind of the whole episode is about how shitty the room is. Having said that,
I talked to him about doing something similar here, but we haven't done it yet.
And having said that, I started working on treating the room, and at some point I have a window over there, and the window behind me is already covered. And I started the treatment, and I would have to cover 70% of this window. And I'm very much into like health, well-being, or what's called, the kind of weirdly named biohacking. And at some point I'm like, okay, I'm not doing this. I'm not covering that window. It's not worth it. And so I have speakers that are adjusted a little bit to the room, and basically I run most things through the two different pairs of headphones, the speakers, and it totally works. And for anything bigger, I go somewhere else.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Are you using room calibration software for that?
No, I do the speakers I have. I visited this Eve Audio speakers, and I visited the headquarters in the summer, and the owner basically, we were talking, there's a couple of these room correction softwares, and they always sound like an MP3 to me when they're on. And I know people that go back and forth on it. And so basically the owner of Eve Audio, went around the room and said, okay, if we were using this room correction software, it would be okay here now, it would be this is the issue here. And despite that people ask for solutions like this, they came up with a different solution, which is basically they have a desk and a bass and mid and a treble setup that you can adjust to your room.
Okay.
And it took a minute until it sounded right to me, and it works, and it translates. Cool. I mean, that's the thing. I think that we all, when we want to do a good job and we want to have the best high-end quality, we kind of, there's a point where it may become too much about the gear and too little about the effective difference. And I worked on an album kind of before, during COVID, and I pre-mixed it here on headphones, and Irko was mixing, and then we went for Gene Grimaldi for mastering. So there's two really nice studios involved, and it sounded exactly how it's supposed to sound, like how I imagined it would sound everywhere else. And so with me having two pairs of headphones that I can trust, I'm kind of like, I'm relaxed with the room now.
Yeah, I hear that. Like, I have, my monitors aren't like the fanciest monitors ever, but I've learned them, so I've just been chilling with it. So I get that attitude, I think.
I did a documentary like Asia Rising for Red Bull, for all these really cool Asian or Asian American hip hop acts. And they had issues with while they're working with the sound, and they called me, and I was traveling in Europe, and I was traveling with with tracking headphones, not even the best headphones. And there was a little bit of a time crunch. So I'm on my laptop with these little headphones, and I'm mixing this thing, and it came out totally fine. It just, you need to understand. I did a video for Adis because there's a couple of things with headphone that can mess you up. And one is, I think that's very important, is when you have headphones that have a really wide sound stage, that's really bad for mixing.
Okay.
And because you kind of, it implodes everywhere else and it gives you a false sense of space. But once you know your headphones or your speakers, well.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. How did you, this is kind of going backwards, I should have asked this at the beginning, but how did you get into all of this? Did you go to school for it? What was your path like?
So I'm from a village of 130 people. Nobody in my family, nobody's in music. There's no entertainment industry or anything. And I just always loved music, and I started playing guitar. And where I grew up, it's heavy metal and soccer. Those are the two things. So basically, I did both, heavy metal and soccer. But while working on music, I very early on. Oh, let's start this. Like most guys, at some point you pick up a guitar and you want to be Yngwie Malmsteen or Steve Vai or something. And so I started all the noodling and all the practicing and tried to be in the fastest heavy metal band. And then I had a kind of interesting experience where I was at like an international conference with lots of 18-year-olds. And there was an Italian guy and me, and we were both playing like scales as fast as we possibly could. And it's like everything that's wrong with boys kind of happening. And there was this young Italian woman that took the guitar away from us and said, "Hey, I know exactly 3 chords, and let me show what matters." And she plays 3 chords and sings a song. And I'm like, okay, yeah, this is better than noodling scales. So I don't know, like I moved fairly fast into like the whole kind of idea of storytelling and songwriting. And then I got very motivated, very serious about this, and I tried to catch up. And because I'm not the child of a music teacher, but I managed to get accepted for classical composition at a university in London. And then I did a bachelor's and a master's in classical composition.
Cool.
And then went back to Germany, taught for a little bit in an institute. And then I started to score little films. And then the films got a little bit bigger. And then I moved to LA and been scoring and working with artists. Yeah.
Cool. That's great. I have a question from Patreon about collaboration, and they're wondering what sorts of collaboration are you doing in your film scores, and are you collaborating with other composers? We talked about musicians and orchestras a little bit, but can you just speak up a little bit about if you're doing collaboration, what kind of collaboration it tends to be?
I mean, usually when I do a film, it's a collaboration with the director. That's where it lives, and try to understand what he wants. And then you score and you do. I just finished a documentary. I just rendered all the stems and all the files on like 2 days ago. And basically in this case, he came by, he sits behind me, and we there's a lot of talking heads in this, but it gets very big and emotional from what these people say, but he wants the music to be subtle. And so we talk about what is this, and we're basically, I'm executing his vision, why is here. So the collaboration usually is with the filmmaker. If it gets a little bigger, like trailers or something like this, and you have epic images with a lot of hit points, it's also kind of the image that dictates a lot of the mechanics.
Yeah.
I don't really collaborate with any other composers. It's a little bit like music producers and composers are in a way kind of the captain of their own ship in a way. So that doesn't really happen a lot or at all. It's I made a choice. When I was in Berlin, I wrote a radio jingle package for a music production house. And they used this package to brand themselves as, hey, we do these interesting modern things. And these interesting modern things where I studied classical music in London, but I used to hang out with all these like drum and bass places. And they, just like in the past with guitar amps, where they would slash the speakers to get the distortion, at that time you had this drum and bass sound with a thick distorted bass and certain things. So I built these radio jingles for like fairly middle of the road radio stations, usually all of these things, and they were kind of unique and interesting. And basically, my contract stated working for them that I was in no way, shape, or form involved in making the music.
Oh,
and
weird.
So you have that a lot. You have, you have these composers that are on 12 TV shows, and what it really means is they write the theme and then the best cue of the show, and then they have people anonymously working on this.
Yeah.
And since that experience, working in this music production house, I kind of gave myself permission, or I'm not working under anybody else's name.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm not like composer number 6 on Castle or something like this.
Yeah.
If a friend would call me and say, hey, I don't know, I can't finish this in time, absolutely, I would help them. But I'm not going to, like, if I do something, it's going to be my name on it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I've definitely been the anonymous person on some stuff.
Yeah, I also know a couple of engineers where they basically listen to the mix and make one note and somebody else is actually engineering. Mm-hmm. Not my world. Not my world.
So you're very hands-on with your stuff?
Yeah, and I like the idea of a humane interaction where you call me and we discuss stuff, we talk over coffee, and I don't need to build walls and I don't need to run a volume business. I'm in it for the experience, for doing cool stuff, and not my world. I usually can manage the workload. If I were, like, sometimes that happens. You have these like 10 episode shows that are shot in one go. They are sometimes weirdly edited in one go. And then you basically, as a composer, you get like 10 hours dumped in front of you. And for that, you would get a little help or something. But I do like treat the people I work with like they're friends, and you want to have like a name, a face, and something real. Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you ever, you said you might bring people in. Do you ever like hire assistants and work with assistants?
Yes, but not a lot, because it's kind of I had a good friend who was my former student, wanted to intern for me to see if the music industry is something for him. So he interned for me for 2 months. After the second day, he came to me and said, look, I'm going to do my very best the next 2 months, but I already know this is not for me. But it's a little tricky. I feel like if you intern in a studio, there's a lot you can pick up.
Yeah.
If you intern for a composer, it's very often you do metadata or crappy tasks, because if the only way you can pick something up is if I actually narrate while I work.
Yeah.
And so I do like help. I do need help with rollout of certain things here and there. And every now and then I have somebody who basically wants to look over my shoulder, and I do something for a week. But I don't really, like, I have a crew and professionals I work with. I don't need a full-time assistant.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So I know you're pretty busy. You've done a ton of work. Do you ever? You must be juggling multiple projects at a time, right?
Yeah.
How do you manage that?
In most cases, the projects kind of manage themselves, because film often moves fairly slowly, and I usually have I have this where people reach out for a commercial, can you jump on this or that? And then there's a rough day where I'm supposed to work on this, and then it never happens. And in the past, I would put these things in my calendar and then kind of have nothing on that day. Or so what I'm doing now is a lot of things in my life are better structured by me not trying to structure them now. And so I do get a lot of commercial briefs where I basically get the brief in the morning and I have to deliver at night. And what I do is that I work on other projects where the timeline is a little bit more relaxed. So I basically can just move things around spontaneously.
I do the same thing.
Yeah, but in most, you also know that when you send something to a band or something and it takes 3 days for them to come back, you work on something else during the time.
Yeah.
So what is a little tricky, if you have like a feature where you have 20 different cues or something, or 50 where you work on, and you have 2 of these where it's 2 times 50 or something like this, then it gets a little more problematic. But usually it's not a problem. I also have my scheduling and the way I work down now that I don't do long nights or any of that stuff anymore. I'm kind of, it's fairly organized. I just start really early. That's kind of like the one weird thing.
Yeah. I've starting earlier and not going as late as I got older.
Yeah. I read about like chronobiology and how it's just basically torture to have a teenager go to school at 7.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
And but for me, it's there's something where if I have a tight deadline for the next morning, where I feel better if I stop working, wind down, go to bed, and wake up. Like I wake up early anyway, and just do it in the morning, fresh.
Yeah, and then you can put more into it because you're fresh.
Yeah, it's also I have a feeling that my decision making doesn't get better during the day. And so I'm kind of doing this kind of ramping up in the morning with a couple of things. It's all energy, and I work and basically load up with facts, with projects, with things. And then towards the afternoon, it gradually kind of winds down. And unless there is an emergency for something that needs to be out tomorrow,
right?
Not working late.
Okay, cool. Do you ever, I had a question on Patreon about copyright stuff, and they're wondering if you're ever able to reuse or repurpose your own music without losing rights.
So a lot of stuff, yes. A lot of, when I started out, you would have an advertising agency would call you, there would be a certain budget, and you write the music, you do a couple of rounds with feedback, and then it would air.
Yeah.
This almost doesn't happen anymore. And what happens now is that you do paid pitches, and very often, if you work on a bigger commercial, it's you and 10 other composers, but that's not really, so the chance is still not 1 in 10. The chance is more 1 in 200 if I work on a project now, because they also do a worldwide sync brief. And it's a very ineffective system that costs the clients lots of money, and that is not really necessary, because in the end, very often you have like 100 of the same. And it also doesn't necessarily get better. But because of that, I have a deep library of constant new things that I work on. And I also work with like music houses and places where if they don't use this, I retain my rights. And there are a couple of shifty places in this field where they would want to retain their rights, your rights, which I find very weird. And I either don't work with them or still use the music. But you can, if you just pitch on something, you can retain the rights. And a lot of stuff I work on is very, very detailed, very specific. And so if I don't know, I do work on a commercial that has to do with water, and I write these string patterns, and I find the exact right vibraphone, microphone placement, and all of this, and it's done. What I've done works. It may not be in this project, but it works. So at some point, usually something comes up where somebody says, oh yeah, and then this should be very dreamlike, this sequence. And then I use elements of that. Again, I also have a hip hop track with a South African rapper that used to be an alarm clock, which is kind of funny.
That's
kind
great.
of how that developed, yeah. And so yeah, stuff does move around. I would like to say though, for the people who write, that it's very important to understand the simple rule, like 100% of nothing is a lot less than 50% of something. And usually the writers that I know that work on bigger stuff and pop songs and all of this, they just walk in the room and nobody talks about it. It's just a given that there will be a certain split and how certain things play out. And it's usually the people that haven't had any song placed or that are really, really kind of keeping things very tight. But there's so much music out there, it's the other way around. You need people to hear it. And I have a whole system of unreleased music to go to music supervisors, to artists, because if they don't hear it, nothing's going to happen with it.
Yeah.
So, and then if something happens to it, what usually happens is that you retain some copyright, but something always goes. Like something like you either lose publishing or somebody changes one word and wants 50%, or something always kind of happens.
Huh. Okay. Have you ever had to pick up a film score where another composer or artist left off? What was that like?
So the first thing is, and I think this is very important for artists to understand, being an artist and being a composer are two completely absolute different things. And hiring an artist to score your film is almost always a bad idea. What you can do is, if you like the sound of an artist and you want exactly the sound, you can say, hey, can we write a song that is already in your style for either theme or for this scene or something? That can be wonderful. But scoring is so very different than being an artist. And most people who are performers struggle to write good material for themselves. And so going out of your comfort zone and then having to write something that has all these like different layers in a style that you have never done, it's dangerous for the filmmaker and for the artist. So yeah, that happens a lot, and then they get fired, and then I step in. Or what happens also sometimes is that if there's songs, they keep the songs, but somebody needs to get out of the song into the score. And but yeah, it does happen. And a friend of mine who's a director just had to fire a different composer and was forced then, after the 90-minute score was done, and is then now has to work with a different composer that the producer picked. And these things happen all the time.
Yeah.
And also on big films, like there's plenty of big films, where there is a fully produced score with orchestral recordings somewhere that didn't make it. And the more cooks in the kitchen, the less it has to do with the music.
Huh. How often does something that you've worked on, that you've started to work on, not just pitching, right, but like actually started to work on, get shelved or cut?
A lot. But this is also part of like working in 2023.
Yeah.
Because I've in the last couple of weeks, I wrote for a Hyundai commercial, for an AT&T commercial, for a Toyota commercial, and for those Cox, Oreos, and a couple more. And if I go through the list of these commercials, it's really interesting how things are out of my control in many ways. So the Hyundai thing, the client and the music house are talking for months and then change course. AT&T is regrouping themselves, may have shelved the project. We don't know. The Oreo commercial, that I looked at the commercial and I knew this would never air like this, because the commercial didn't really work. There was a set of 3, 2 were okay, but 1 didn't work. And so you score this, I already knew while I was working on this is not gonna air. And so this is fairly regular. It's not, if you move into like different arenas where, for example, if you score a documentary with a filmmaker and you have this conversation and it's a direct conversation, then usually this doesn't happen. Usually even if you disagree on something, you just do the versions until they're happy, and then you wrap it up and move on, and it airs with your music. But in many other ways, I want to pitch for a show theme, and basically I was very excited about the show coming out, and then the show comes out and there's a Nicki Minaj song in the main titles instead of the music I wrote.
Oh no.
And so I call the music house and they're like, oh, we forgot to tell you, we found out that Nicki Minaj likes the show.
Oh gosh.
And it's also then it's like it's a very sporty, very fast cut opening sequence, and they put a song from Nicki Minaj and then it's far too slow. But then again, it's Nicki Minaj. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, the show will probably still be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. With like things that are kind of like audio branding, like a theme song, what kind of advice do you have? Like, what do you think about? How is that different? What do you think about with that kind of thing?
So with like audio branding, that's like 5 seconds. It becomes a surprising amount of work for how short it is, because you need to communicate lots of different things, and also very important not to communicate certain other things in this very brief amount of time. And so it's a mixture. Like, I like composition because you can build big arcs and tell a story over time. But this is almost, because it's so short, the choices of sound and how the sounds are mixed, are placed, are almost more communicative than the notes are. It's kind of, it all gels, but it's very important to hit something on a very non-verbal, almost non-musical level, in a sense of putting somebody in the right space. And I had one mnemonic where the idea was that basically the brand is saying, you're at home here, you can feel comfortable here. And so I was playing around with stuff where you would breathe out at the end. You listen to the audio logo and then you would breathe out. And so it's a matter of space, of creating just a tiny little bit of tension, but then there's this kind of ramp down at the end. And I've done a little bit of musical, like musical intersection stuff with Fear of Flying and binaural stuff, and controlling the brainwaves with music and stuff like this. So I try to use from all the tools I possibly can to achieve this. But mnemonics are fun, but they can be tricky because you have 5 seconds to tell a fairly big story.
Yeah, I assume there's a lot of subconscious stuff with that too.
Yes, and it's also this totally personal, non-scientific, like I'm feeling this because of this color of this movement because they do this. But then there's also audience research for age groups, for this and that, and you have the decks where they explain what the brand stands for, and I've been on 4-hour meetings with like 8 people for a 5-second audio logo, and it's I don't know, it's an interesting field, and it can be very useful for a brand. It can be really, really useful, especially if you have lots of different touch points with an audience. And it can also be useful to have, just like as a sound consultant, not to do like this. One thing is with like apps, a simple thing, for example, with apps, people use earbuds, but people have this idea that like in pop music, if your song is louder, you stay on the station. So now your app has an opening chime or an opening song or something, or sound when you boot it, and people have their earbuds in and it's too loud and you're annoying them. You're really annoying them, and people might not come back, and especially if they cannot fix the volume. So different places, different rules, and if you're in somebody's head with headphones, that different than you walk by a store, and there's like all these kind of other considerations.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think about for a while I did musical theater stuff, and we would have these meetings where we talk, some of the shows I was there for the sound design formation, and just sitting and talking about how one tiny little sound affects the emotion for the longest time. That's what I imagine it's probably like with the branding stuff.
Yeah, it is. And sometimes it's also, I like to think things through, and of course I need to respect the other side, and so I think things through for myself and for them, and I try to understand them, but there's also a point where you kind of also need to let go, and this is kind of like an interesting thing. And when it's more cooks in the kitchen, it gets to a point where everybody brings their baggage, and then the final result is worse than the initial idea. And you have that a lot. Like I watch sometimes when you watch new shows and you see a show theme that is so flat and boring, you can almost imagine the 8 executives on that TV show saying, yeah, but we can't have this because of that, and we can't have this. So I think it's for any of this stuff, I think it's important to be open and like look at data, listen to everybody, but it also helps if you work with people that can let go at some point.
Yeah. That's like, I was watching this video the other day, and I think it was a Sonic Scoop video, and it was someone talking about the mixing death spiral.
Yeah.
I forget who it was, but that makes me think about that because it's like you could just overmix. If you start going after a mix and just trying to do what you're like technically supposed to do in a mix, like you can just murder it so badly.
Yeah, and I mean it's also with composition. One of the things that I tend to do is that like there's all these ideas of elements, and I write a version, orchestrate it, then listen to it, and the next day I go in and say, okay, we don't need this line, we don't need this line, we don't need this line. And then when it comes to kind of like, in a way, you know, when you mute something that's part of composition as well, in a way, if you're producing, then you're like, okay, it's actually works without this piano, it works without that. And where I'm very much a composer mixing is I don't like when the one doesn't hit or when the next section is not carved out. And I had a hip hop producer from Berlin here sitting behind me, and she probably does an entire track in the same time that I'm doing a move from one section to the next. And I built this like little string arrangement and this dissonance and that distortion and all of this, just so the one, because a lot of these songs are just basically loops. And who wants to listen to a loop for 4 minutes? That's one of my kind of things with, I really, really like hip hop, but how many songs do you know that where after a minute or so you're not ready to switch off? So I start doing these little things, and I have people sit behind me going like, why are we doing this? And
it's like, because I need to.
Because I need to. I also think it actually does make a difference, but its detail can work against you. And very interesting, I just listened to something where they've basically said that people who are really good at math and keeping a lot of data in their mind are very bad at changing their minds about things that matter. And I thought that's very interesting. That's very interesting. And I include myself there sometimes where you use data and detail and all of this when you probably have this as well. You're mixing on something, you're working, and you really know something doesn't work, or you need to cut the section or something, but you're still sitting there and throwing new things at it.
I've been doing that there's this one song that I'm working on with somebody, and I'm like, oh, it's too simple, right? Like it's too simple right now. And so we keep trying to add stuff and just like nothing's working. And I finally am like, maybe we just need to let it be simple and like maybe change the mixing a little bit as the song progresses or something. But like production elements, maybe we're just trying to overwork it at this point. I don't know. But we haven't fully accepted that yet. We're talking about it now, but we're still, slow to.
I mean, sometimes it's also when I get stuff to mix or arrange on, and I can see that the bones of the composition have an issue, and then it gets really tricky because people are very, very sensitive to touch the actual bones of the composition. But I have a feeling we are a little too much tech and post-production focused when we talk about music now, and especially with like hip hop or EDM, where very often I don't know your song, but sometimes it's this kind of thing where, okay, if we have like 2 chord changes before the chorus, all of a sudden the simple arrangement works and everybody's happy. And so I do this kind of backseat producing sometimes, where basically somebody calls me and says, oh, my friend is in this band. They have really good stuff going on, but it's at 85%. Can you have a look at it? And then I basically just like, without kind of changing who they are or where the direction is going like, okay, if we can do this here and we write this there and this, that, and but you need to be willing to do this. And very often you kind of try to fix it in mixing where the problem is before.
Yeah. And I think I've noticed that too with people. I think people the people that I've been lucky enough that are very experienced mixers, they're usually very comfortable like rearranging something in the mixing phase. Whereas like I think when people are starting out more, they're afraid to do that, especially if you're like working with and I did this too. Like if you're working with clients, you don't want to mess up their song, so to speak. So you're afraid to change it. It's like, what did they hire me for type of thing.
Yeah. And I had this, somebody sent me this track by a very talented artist, and it's a good track, but basically the manager called me and said, everything is in here. It's too much. This guy is always overdoing it, and we're not getting it out because of that. And so I looked at the track, and I basically did a version that is, if you A/B it with his version, it almost sounds the same. It's the just slightly cleaned up version. Because I know when I send stuff to other people for mix, I hate when it comes back and the intention has been changed.
Right. Yeah.
So his thing, probably not for good reason, was far too loud and far too bright. But I still send the version back where it's like, okay, this is kind of yours. And then this is a more moderate version. But it's important to... I don't know. I think this is a matter of conversation as well, because there are people who are happy to discuss stuff with you, and then there's people where you're a hired hand and be quiet and just do your thing.
Yeah. You have to like sort it out, figure out how far you can go.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes you can, the nice thing now, it's so easy to just show, where you can say like, hey, this is what I would do. This is another way. And I mixed an album where the singer had a very specific sound in mind, and it was very kind of like drawn out, very thick and wall of sound, and kind of you can zone out to the music. And she was right with her intention. The album did well, and people really, really like it. Having said that, there were 3 songs on the album that they wrote. I didn't write anything that they wrote that totally resisted that treatment. And so she basically gave me notes, versions and versions and versions. With every note, the song got worse. And then she calls me and says, I don't know if we should put the song on the album. And then I basically did a mix that is completely ignoring all the things she asked for. And I said, hey, this is a cool song if we do it like this. And then she said, oh, interesting. And then we do another 10 rounds of notes, and it's back to not working.
Yeah.
And so at some point, I kind of like did my own mix party where it's like, okay, here's the notes for your, and here's my version. So currently we have 2 parallel versions. But that was because they were searching, they knew they were searching, and they understood that I went the extra mile to help them. So there was no ego, no problem. But
That's
if
good.
you deal with people where they think you're hijacking something, then it's a problem. If they understand you're on their side.
Yeah.
And one thing I started doing that really helps me with this, I do all these screen videos. And I know that some people hate the videos. And I got like this artist saying, like, if I don't have watch any more of your videos, like I'll have a nice life. But one thing that when I'm at work and I tape myself, they can see the session and say, hey, I did this for this and that reason. And I noticed you're saying this word there, and this is why I drop out this, and this is why I'm using that effect. And if you send that to somebody and they see how much you care and how hard you work for them, the conversation usually changes. And that's kind of, once people realize I'm like, I do this because I care. And so then it gets a little easier.
Yeah. That makes sense. I started over time, I've started giving people more detailed notes on what I did and why. Yeah. Maybe that's similar. I haven't tried the screen share thing though. That's cool.
Yeah, you can live hear it. You can say, oh, this is with or without. And it's also sometimes when you get, I got vocals, I got wet vocals with all kinds of stuff baked in, and they went into a delay and then into a reverb. So there's T's when the word is over floating around in the background and they sound like noise. And so basically, when I then solo this and said like, so you can hear how this floating T from here hits on that word. Because of that, I cannot get this clean. So if you can give me this like this, I can fix this. But if you want me to work with this, the side effect is that. And that's so much easier than trying to explain that in an email.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And we get so honed in on because we're used to thinking about that stuff, but a lot of people don't have the vocabulary, or they aren't used to thinking about a lot of that, I think.
I think that with labels not developing people or managements and like the music industry changing that way, big problem is that there is no kind of grown up as a sounding board or as help for artists and for bands. And so what I see is people who have good songs, but they record at home on a $99 interface, and or they don't do. Especially in COVID, nobody was on tour, and then you don't have those songs haven't lived for a year, and that's why they're not around. So I think that this whole idea of artist development on the creative side, on the actual music production side, or somebody that basically just explains to you why a vocal preamp is so important, that is vital. But I think that with the everybody having tools at home and people say music is more like democratic, there's a lot of that is true, but also there's a lot of that which leads to people not doing their kind of apprenticeship, and they don't actually get information they would have gotten in the past.
Yeah. I think like the whole, especially the studio and engineering world, I think a lot of the mentorship systems are kind of breaking down. Like one of the studios that I worked at years ago, like they got rid of their staff engineer while I was there. So it was all just people that, like it was like, who do you learn from? You had to go find your own mentor basically if you're,
And I mean, most
sad.
people, I know I've been to I'm not going to say now too much in terms of detail because I don't want to kind of like get in trouble with that colleague, but I know somebody who has a very nice studio and doesn't drive in because he mixes at home on $300 headphones. And that workflow is becoming more and more normal. And of course, it's not fun to intern for somebody in their living room on the headphones.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of like halfway in between them, because on the one hand, I'm so grateful that if I have an idea, I can score something on like a Hollywood level at home.
Yeah.
And if I have an idea over coffee an hour later, I can hear it.
Yeah.
And I can hear it well. And so I love that. And there's other stuff where some of the audio post tools like voice repair and taking out reverb and stuff has gotten so good over the last couple of years. So I'm very grateful for all this gear and all this stuff around and all the connections you can make. But on the other hand, I also kind of like believe that the real people in a hub, in a real world kind of scenario leads to deeper learning and better music.
Yeah. It's like we have to rebuild the hub or something. Because like it's like pros and cons, right? Like this is my garage technically that I'm in, so it's like I wouldn't be able to do this if it, that part of the world hadn't.
No, for me the kind of the room, like if you're in a studio somewhere and the overheads of the room are a problem, and there's a lot of bigger names that have given up their spaces, but I don't know, you could like. I think still community. I mean, there's a rehearsal space not far from here, which very luckily for me makes really excellent coffee as well.
Nice.
So that's a little bit of a hub where you can sit and hang out and talk to other music people. But I almost have to like artificially create this a little bit now. And I mean, I like working from home, but that's the only kind of like bad side effect.
Yeah, you have to like go out of your way to find things. Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about like your musical inspiration a little bit, and then also about the project that you're working on. Your little out of tune baby.
Yeah. So inspiration, when it is like a film project, it almost is just I just look at it and respond to it. There's not really. I've been doing this so long. It's not really a process anymore. If it's really short form, I jam it. If it's long form, I plan it out like an architect and then kind of jam a little plan. And so inspiration is never a problem, really. Like I very rarely get stuck on anything, and I have my life and how I work so tuned that I basically, if I work and I'm stuck for like a minute, I put this in my head and walk half an hour to coffee, have a coffee, walk back, and then it's solved kind of thing.
Cool.
And sometimes what happens, I think, to everybody is you're kind of like running very fast in the wrong direction. That still doesn't happen as much, but it still does happen. But inspiration, usually the image is the story, and I always try to do something that feels very true and undeniable. So be it a pop song or be it something, if I work on something, it's this idea that I want it to be very specific in this very unique pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And I send like 3 hip hop songs that I really like that I produced with a fantastic rapper to this music supervisor. And the rapper got signed to Warner with the first song before it was even out or before we did anything with it. So these turned out really, really well. And he listens to it and he said, I really like that this is hip hop and it's not at the same time.
Cool.
And that's a lot what I do. A lot of what I do is its very own weird little thing. And I don't know why I need to and want to get to find this particular space. But that's the inspiration. I hear something and in my mind something happens. It's like a non-verbal cloud in my brain and I tinker with it until the music sounds exactly like that cloud thingy I had in my mind.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Do you like things that are between genres more than things that hit the genre on the head?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that there is any point for a band that sounds like the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Outside of the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any point, like what usually happens is there's usually a big female pop star right now and a rapper that are the kind of like the North Star. And then everybody goes out and by the time they have their music out, somebody else is hip and they sound like second best.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I really like, and that's when I write with artists, is to figure out, why does this person talk the way they talk? Why do they walk the way they walk? And people have an internal rhythm as well. There's people where it's very hard to get them to sing anything snappy and fast. And then there's people that cannot relax on their vocal lines. And so everybody has their own little thing. And I think that carving that out into something that can work on radio. So you want to have it palatable and cool and big and loud and all of this. Mm-hmm. But the initial course should be something real and unique. And that's where kind of so very often things are weirdly between genres or
That's cool.
Yeah, I have a friend who I studied with. He's in Greece. He's recording the Thessaloniki Symphony Orchestra, and he is in my feedback loop. I'm in his, and very often I send him stuff, and his response is just, "Why?" And
what do you say?
I don't know. I don't know. But it's the kind of thing why you would kind of work with me, because the idea is let's say you're a 19-year-old female artist and you want to have a cool single when you're 20. Mm-hmm. So when you have a time to work and maybe, work with the management or with people, you get the image, the look, what is going to be a music video, you create like a package. It makes no sense when this thing comes out and it sounds like anything else. Mm-hmm. It is important to be off the time. I think that's very important. I can't just do whatever. It needs to work. That's so there's plenty of stuff where I'm okay, we're not loud enough, not bright enough, or I don't know, the intro is too slow. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it kind of is this connection happens through something unique, and that's what I try to find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that can be, and that's goes back to your earlier question with in my case, this can be somebody wants to do the quietest, easy listening jazz album or the loudest hip hop track. I'm kind of interested to work on that.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, can you talk about your project? I know you had theremin on it. See, I have a theremin right there.
Yeah.
So I'm really into it. I don't know how to say it though, because what language is it?
It's French.
That's what I thought. I'm bad at French.
It is French, and it's boom dans l'espace. But I should have a French person also say that it's basically boom is party, but also explosion. So it's kind of at the same time it's the Big Bang, but also party in space.
Sweet.
And it's also, I had an English name before, but this makes so much more sense for all the weirdness that is going on with this, and kind of happy I went with this name.
Yeah, it's fitting.
So it's a retro synthesizer sci-fi album, and it's very 50s when you kind of watch the bad spaceship on a string in black and white on a Saturday morning as a kid, like on some channel, the werewolf where you can still, like, you know, the werewolf that still wears sneakers running through like the bad studio set kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's a little of that. It's a little space exploration, and it's all very humane and kind of emotional in a way. So it's not like cold. It's warm, round, retro, and I kind of wanted to do something different, and usually it's not like, I don't release albums under my own name usually, but this kind of grew out of me playing around with a lot of analog synth sounds. And I had 3 pieces that were written for something else that all kind of fell a little bit in this world, and a little bit steampunky kind of theremin. And at some point, once they had their life in their original form, I thought it would be kind of a shame not to do something with them. And one of them is the first track of the album, which was initially written for like a Nikola Tesla film, and a whole kind of like IP project and stuff around, and where one of the people on this group had written a biography on Nikola Tesla, and there's the stuff with numerology and number mysticism and stuff. And so I thought I'd do a different starting point, and I just kind of like used his letters to create a melody, and then harmonized that, and that was kind of weird, and then a little kind of out of tune upright piano, and so kind of like that set the tone. And then I have a couple more tracks that are more like space exploration, but the synthesizers are out of tune. There's always a little tape wobble, and everything is kind of like cutesy and different.
Yeah.
And it's so that thing is out everywhere, and it's also out in 3D, which I created the cover where it says 3D on there, which is like super goofy, but you can also listen to it in Atmos.
Nice.
Basically.
I like the videos that you have for it too on Instagram.
Thank you. Yeah,
they're great. Yeah, people should check it. I'll put links in the description for people.
Thank you. Yeah, they're fairly weird. I am enjoying them a lot. Maybe too much, but yes.
It seems like something that's like a lot of fun to work on, and it's it has like an atmosphere to it that's kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but it's kind of like calming, and I don't know how to describe it. People have to check it out. It's cool. I'm into it.
Yeah, it's weird. One thing about the videos was a long time ago, when I was still living in London, I wrote a song about, I was stuck in the underground so much. There's like signal failure or something like this. And I was very grateful to be in London, to study music, to see all these concerts and all of this. And it seemed like the underground was the karma price to pay. And so I, with friends, we started to kind of joke about, you know, our dirty little secret, the underground. And basically, so I wrote a song which is basically with a lead character, which is me, talking about this, but it's all kind of in code. It's more like this guy who doesn't have the John who doesn't have a lot of money for that kind of somewhat filthy prostitute. So that's the interaction. The filthy prostitute is the London Underground. So I'm doing this song, and I'm like, it's extra dorky, it's extra fun, it's a weird song, and I play it to people. And I can see that like 1 in 10 people gets it. Yeah. And which is kind of like, of course, my problem, not their problem. And I was at a film festival, and I saw this filmmaker from Frankfurt. She did this like a music video where she just wrote on the road somewhere, and then the car travels, and there's different things, and there's some like motion graphics, very handmade, and it was very simple, and it really, really helped to tell the story. And so I asked her if she would do a video for the song, and she did a kind of photo slideshow, but very much with the lady in the fishnet that had bad lipstick all over, like half of the lipstick was on the lips. And so what changed was when people watched the video, they fully got that I meant it with the music. This was on purpose. It's weird on purpose. And so the combination of the video and the song made it work. And so with the retro sci-fi thing now, what I'm doing is I have this video. When you watch the videos, you're like, oh, that's what we're doing. And if you don't get it by yourself, it's very useful, very effective to kind of put you in the right mindset. And I have a couple of people, like friends who are animators, who listen to the album while they animate, or people to kind of like zone out and do kind of like their little trip in a spaceship with this thing. And I don't know, it's supposed to put you in a mindset, and if it doesn't work all by itself, when you listen to the first time, check out the videos. They're kind of silly.
Yeah, they're great. Yeah. Is there, I know I've kept you a long time, so I'm going to let you go in a second. Is there anything that you want to promote or do a shout out for? Or
No, I mean, well, check out the album and find me in a coffee place somewhere in LA. And no, I'm just enjoying my, LA took a couple of extra rounds with the pandemic. We kind of had, weirdly enough, the pandemic like 18 months longer than in London or somewhere else. But now I'm just so grateful that everything is back, and I've been to like music events, showcases, film stuff all the time. And I just love what I do in this community. And so I'm basically, just when you see me somewhere, say hi. That's the thing, kind of.
I love it.
And thank you for having me also.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for coming on. I guess I'll just do my outro then. So thanks everyone for hanging out. As always, like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. I have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Cato Noise. A lot of my questions today came from the Patreon, so feel free to check that out. And I come out with new videos every Wednesday, and thanks so much for hanging out. Okay. That's my outro.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sorry, I always feel so awkward starting these things.